so we will go ahead and call the meeting to order. We have all commissioners present, but we'll do roll call in a moment. Before we do that, I want to remind everybody that if you are not speaking, please keep your microphone on mute. It'll help keep some of the distractions down. For anybody attending from the public, please note that you need to email your public comments in to climatepubliccomments@chicoca.gov. I will repeat that again later in the meeting in case you missed that. Molly, would you like to roll call?
Chair Chapter.
Here.
Vice Chair Steeman.
Here.
Commissioner Donnan.
Here.
Commissioner Monfort. Oh, hold on.
He's muted.
Commissioner Monfort.
He waved here.
Commissioner Nelson.
Here.
And Commissioner Casey.
Here.
Perfect. Moving on to item number 2, consent agenda, which includes the approval of the minutes. Do you have any motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Any second?
I think that was Dave seconding.
Yeah, sorry.
Perfect.
Thank you, Mark.
Good. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I'd abstain as I was not present at the last meeting.
Okay. Any opposed? And Commissioner Nelson abstains. So 5-0-1. Moving on, number 3, item number 3, we have a presentation from hvac. We have John Clark who's joined us today. So John, I will turn the floor over to you, the virtual forum.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Very good. Well, Brendan asked that I give you folks an update on some of the activities that Butte County Association of Governments are working on this coming fiscal year regarding projects that help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm going to go through items, and if there are questions, just stop me along the way. The first item I was going to kind of report to the committee is that BCAG received a grant earlier this year from Caltrans to kind of continue on with a study that we actually started in the 2012-13 fiscal year, which was to look at a daily commuter service from Chico to Sacramento. And so we got a grant, and we're going to pick that up again and look at that service. Of course, since we did that study back in 2012, 2013, you know, we've had the campfire and COVID, and that certainly is going to impact the commuting between Butte County and Chico. And the purpose of the study we did was to look at, is it feasible to start a daily commuter service to go from Chico to Sacramento? So we're going to revisit that. And a couple things that we need to look at is what has been the impact of the campfire to commuting from Butte County to Sacramento, and then again, COVID, and how has that impacted commuting? Because obviously we all know that working from home since COVID has impacted things a lot, and it's probably reduced daily travel between Butte County and Sacramento. So we plan to get this study going in the next couple of months. We have a request for proposals to look at that. Ideally, again, if we did get a commuter service from Chico to Sacramento, that would be a good option for people that make that daily commute. The service that we looked at would be to run 2 AM routes from Chico down to Sacramento with stops in Oroville, Marysville, then into various locations in downtown Sacramento. But we really need to revisit what has changed since the campfire and COVID. So this study will probably be going on for the next year, possibly longer. Again, we hope to get that underway in the next couple of months. But you know, the benefits of having a daily commuter service would be that it would reduce, you know, VMT and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So hopefully we can get that study going, and it'll probably, like I said, be a year or so before we have any recommendations from it. But that is one study we're going to be getting underway soon.
You think the airport would be hit?
So I get that question all the time. And service to the airport it's a different animal, you know, because people going to the airport, those things and those trips happen all the time, daily, on different hours, and it's really difficult to try to accommodate that. So what we would try to do is that the San Joaquin Joint Powers Agency that operates and manages San Joaquin rail service between Bakersfield and soon North Natomas, we'll be trying to get a train station in Natomas, and they will be running a daily, hourly, I think, service between Natomas and the airport. So what we would do is when that service gets established, which I understand will be sometime in 2021, we would make a stop at the Natomas station in Sacramento so that people could take the shuttle over to the airport. But this, you know, our service on the commuter service would not serve the airport because it would deviate 30 minutes to get to the airport. So our focus is more on getting people that commute from Butte and Yuba counties into Sacramento.
Right. I noticed I've taken the Greyhound from Sacramento to here, and I've also taken what you have to buy an Amtrak ticket for, but Capitals thing. And those buses are pretty loaded at really unreasonable times in the morning.
Yeah. And actually, the San Joaquin Joint Powers Agency that again runs the San Joaquins on kind of a separate side thing has asked us to look at, could we provide or take over that contract that they currently have with another contractor just to provide the throughway service, as they call it, through Amtrak, between Chico and Sacramento, maybe also into Davis. So we're also examining that and coordinating our Chico to Sac study with them. So we haven't gotten too far into that, but it's possible that we could, as a separate contract, deal with the Amtrak throughway service from Chico to Sacramento, maybe Davis, and then if we could work it out so that our commuter service from Chico to Sacramento could kind of dovetail in with that, we would try to accomplish both of those objectives together. The other project we're working on is maybe some of you know, BCAG is also the owner-operator for Butte Regional Transit, or the B Line. And we're under a state mandate with California Air Resources Board to convert our fleet to electric buses totally by 2040. But we have some deadlines starting in 2026. All bus purchases after 2026, 25% of those have to be electric buses. By 2029, 100% of our bus purchases have to be electric or zero emission. We're going to go the electric route, and we're working on that currently. We have a request for proposals coming in actually tomorrow to do the infrastructure needs that we have to do at our transit facility to provide for charging at our facility. We recently got a grant from the Federal Transit Administration of about $1.7 million to purchase electric buses and charging infrastructure. So we anticipate that we will start running our first electric buses probably in 2022. Those buses will start by operating more than likely in Chico, maybe a bus up to Paradise, maybe a bus to the county. Right now, we're planning to purchase one bus, but it's possible we might be able to purchase up to 3 buses to start the kind of testing of running electric buses within the county. Of course, those projects would reduce greenhouse gas emissions by switching from diesel buses to electric buses. We're also involved with working again with the San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority that manages again the San Joaquin Rail Service, which currently goes between Sacramento and Bakersfield. Again, they will be extending their service up to Natomas in 2021, as far as I know. We're working to see if we can get rail service extended up to Butte County. That service would go to Oroville. So we're looking at hopefully trying to do whatever we can to expedite that service starting sooner. We're probably looking at a 5-year horizon there. They're very interested in extending that passenger rail service to Oroville. That would probably be the most northern terminus for passenger rail service. And that would allow us to link in not only to getting people to connect to destinations in the San Joaquin Valley, but also connect to the high-speed rail service, which is planned to run between Merced and Bakersfield.
So that would end in Oroville?
That's correct, because the rail line that we're looking at is going up the UP tracks that go through Oroville, not along the rail tracks that go in through Chico currently, which I think the Coast Starlight runs on. They're looking at the rail line that goes through Natomas, then would go through Marysville, and then Oroville. So they're very interested in doing that. They currently have, I want to say, about over $500 million that are programmed to make improvements to get them to Natomas. So again, I'm serving on the San Joaquin Rail Advisory Committee. I actually have a meeting with them this Friday. And so we are trying to work with them to see what we can do to get that service extended through Marysville and then up to Oroville. The other projects we're working on are we're currently doing what's called a post-campfire planning study. And we're doing that because obviously when the campfire impacted and really hurt the town of Paradise, the population shifted significantly, as the city of Chico knows. We are looking at the changes in travel patterns within the county. Also, again, those people that might have commuted to the county south of us. And as part of that plan, we're doing an update to what we call the transit non-motorized plan. And that plan's focus is improving transportation networks for people that walk, bike, and use transit. We're in the early stages of updating that plan. It probably won't be completed until June or July of next year. Finally, again, all the work that we do as a state federal transportation agency, we have to prepare what's called a regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy. The sustainable community strategy is a plan that requires us to document and show that we're making reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. So all these projects that we do, that the cities, the counties do, are in that plan. It's kind of our transportation general plan. And we are updating our 2020 regional transportation plan, sustainable community strategy, which our board will adopt in December. And as part of that plan, we have to document what emission reductions we're going to make with our transportation projects. We have to reduce emissions for the precursors to ozone, ROG and NOx, and we will be making a decrease in those emissions. And then based on the plan that we have in place as proposed with the 2020 document, it would reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the 2020 year by 15%. It's a 20-year plan that goes out to 2035, and at that point in time, we show a greenhouse gas emission reduction of about 10%. And that's based on all the projects that we know at this time. That plan is updated every 4 years. It's also a plan that we can update at any time and make amendments to. So as projects come along, we can fold those into that plan. So those are really the projects we have going on right now. So I'm happy to address any questions anybody on the committee might have.
Thanks, John. I've got a few questions, but it looks like Kirk, you've got some questions first.
Yes. You use traffic counts from Chico to figure out what the demand might be? I mean, like at 6 o'clock in the morning at East First Avenue, the on-ramp, it's just crazy. I was totally predictable, but 6 o'clock in the morning, if you hit it any weekday, there's this huge rush of traffic, and it's a 2-hour drive to Sacramento.
Right.
So you're using those on-ramp figures, traffic count?
I don't think we're doing counts specifically at the on-ramp. We do, as part of our requirements, we have to maintain a countywide transportation model that looks at ADT regionally. The campfire, when it occurred in November 2018, it really impacted us a lot because we were already underway with updating our 2020 plan. And we actually got extra funding to help us revisit all of our assumptions that go into our planning and our transportation model. Unfortunately, a lot of that information is quantified right now, but it will be better quantified by our 2024 update. So, we're doing the best we can with the time frame we had. We have a deadline to get our regional transportation plan, sustainable community strategy done by December. That's our deadline. But we probably are not going to have everything data-wise that we need until our 2024 update.
Thank you.
Looks like Mark, you have some questions, comments?
Yeah, I have a question for John. We're updating our climate action plan right now, and there's a number of measures in here about expanded transportation service, primary corridors. Do you have any comments on this, or how do you see that unfolding?
To be honest, Mark, I feel like we almost need to do another survey of things because things have changed so much with COVID, and we just don't have the data yet. I mean, there's a lot of obviously a lot of changes in people's commute patterns since COVID. I mean, that's why we're, as part of this Chico to Sac study, need to revisit. We're, the population has shifted in Butte County since 2012-13, and certainly with COVID, are people commuting between Butte County and Sacramento like we were back then? And probably not. I mean, the state agencies, federal agencies, a lot of people are working from home, and it's changed, commuting patterns. We just don't have that data yet, and we need to try to do it. So, or get a better handle on that. And I would like us to do some type of survey, hopefully in the next year, to better look at, where are people in Butte County? Are they commuting south to other, or south or wherever? Where are they commuting to? Or are they working from home more? So, we're trying to grapple with these things as best we can. We don't have as good a handle on that as I would like to have. So.
I could very much appreciate that. I guess more to the point is that we're producing this plan in which the city has to reduce greenhouse gases, in which a couple of the features are transit, but they're not actually in the control of the city of Chico. And so, I mean, how do you see this playing out? I mean, we've been doing this, I've been hearing from you for years. You've been doing a great job, but nothing's really been changing. How do we change it differently? How do we because this isn't about going back and forth to Sacramento. It's not about going back and forth through the county. It's about going throughout the city. That doesn't really resonate with a intergovernmental agency when we're just talking about the jurisdiction of one government.
Right.
How are we going to square this circle, per se, or however we want to, whatever metaphor we think is appropriate?
Well, and we are going to try to do. We do have some funding through FTA to try to look at revisiting for example, our fixed route system here within Butte County, because when COVID happened, our transit ridership declined by 80%. We're probably back up to around 50%, but we need to do more analysis and more of a study to see where people here just in Butte County need for transit service. And hopefully we can start that study in the next year or two. We haven't. So I don't have a good answer there, other than we need to revisit the ridership here in Butte County and look at what can we do to better serve people in Butte County, but also encourage people that maybe don't use transit now to use public transit. We do have some tools coming in place. We're in the process of implementing a mobile fare system that allows people to buy their tickets through their smartphones, so they can make that more convenient to get their ride and their tickets. We've implemented a system that people can get real-time information on the buses and when the bus is coming. But we do need to look at, again, the changes that have resulted from COVID and how better to operate our fixed route system here in not only Chico, and Chico obviously is the biggest user of the system. We just haven't had a chance yet to analyze that to see what improvements we can make the fixed route to better serve existing riders, but also try to encourage other people that don't use transit to make them want to try to use transit in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other commissioners before I launch my questions? Okay, thanks, John. A couple questions, and I think you answered one already. So I was going to ask about the impacts to ridership given the COVID situation. And I think I heard you say that you're back up to about 50% of normal. Is that right?
Right, that's correct.
Okay. You lost about, did I hear about 80% during the peak of COVID?
During the peak, yeah, our ridership had declined about 80%. And that was looking at both fixed route service, which you guys know is the fixed route that stops at all the bus shelters and so forth. But we also, that's also including paratransit service, ADA service to the folks that make reservations on our smaller buses for paratransit ADA service. So, it's picked back up. And again, we're at about 50%, maybe a little above that, but it's been down, obviously. And that's something that's, not only happening here, but nationwide. So it's a challenge to try to recoup and get people back on transit.
Right. I had a side note. I had a meeting with Jim Peplow earlier, I think it was just this week, about the Chico State situation and recognizing that with classes no longer happening on the Chico State campus, trying to gauge what sort of impact that has, which it looks like it's substantial. And so we'll continue those conversations and see. We'll just have to see what time does to us.
Yeah.
We don't know yet what next semester is going to look like. There's a possibility we may have some attempt at classes in person again, but we'll have to wait on that. So good, thank you. I had another question about, I know there were conversations about a year ago, and I believe an agreement was reached for Flix Bus, F-L-I-X bus,
Right.
to start having a stop in Chico. Do you know what that situation is?
They were, I don't have an update, but I know they were supposed to start probably by now, again, prior to COVID. And we'd arranged with them to have a stop location at our transit center in downtown Chico. And then another stop at a park and ride facility in Oroville. That hasn't happened. I don't have more information on that, but I could certainly follow up to you on that. We were prepared.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, for those of you who are unfamiliar, FlixBus, and I've never experienced FlixBus myself directly. It was actually started in Germany and is quite popular in Europe, and they are gaining a foothold in the US. And so they operate similar to the Greyhound, but a bit more, app-based and kind of a bit more modern than I think what Greyhound or Amtrak have headed in. So they currently have routes running between, Los Angeles, San Diego, up to Sacramento, into San Francisco, Davis, and so they were looking to continue to move north. And so that seems like another option, in parallel to see how that would impact, Beeline's move with this regional service. And I agree with, Kirk's comments, and I know we've heard this a million times about the airport and commuting, to and from Chico to the Sacramento airport. So, yeah, and I can follow up offline with you about the FlixBus situation. Just curious about that one. And then my last question for you was about any other organizations, and you don't have to name names, but if you had any idea on, are there any large businesses, institutions, organizations like Chico State that are subsidizing bus passes for their employees, members, whatever, which I know Chico State does, but are there other large entities that are already doing that?
I got to think that there are. I mean, obviously in communities where you have either state or university colleges, typically like we do with Chico State, we have an agreement, and they provide as part of their fees to students. We offer free rides. Well, I shouldn't say free. This university reimburses us, but students, faculty, and staff can ride the bus service free, and that's what we have in place with Chico State. And I would assume that exists in several communities where you have a university or state college. So,
well, I meant specifically for Beeline and Chico. Like, are there any other large employers that are doing the same thing? There's Chico State on an island.
Yeah, Sierra Nevada has a program with us, and I think the Downtown Association does have two with us as well. So
I know that was brought up as a possible recommendation in the CAP, is to encourage large employers to offer some sort of subsidized transit for their employees.
Right. And again, we certainly welcome that. And, I always perceive the big challenge with a transit system in a community our size is trying to capture those people that don't depend on it and need transit, but also, just people that don't typically use the system. We want to try to encourage, these, like Bill.com was out by our agency, but now they're all working from home. It's more challenging now, but we certainly will work with any larger employee to try to do what we can to encourage, ridership on the Beeline. But I think just aside from probably Chico State, Sierra Nevada, the DBA or Downtown Business Association, that's probably the only relationships we have in Butte County right now.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any questions or comments for John? Mike, go ahead.
Thanks. You guys have actually covered fairly well a few of the questions I wanted to ask, and with what Mark asked. And mine's just a little more kind of broad in general. When we look at our climate action planning, transportation is a huge impact area, and looking at that, and you guys are doing some great work in that regard. So just kind of my broad question is, do you have any thoughts or ideas? How can you help us more with what we're charged with on this climate action plan for Chico, and how can we help you with what you're working on? There's a lot of overlap there. So just wondering if you have any just sort of parting thoughts, ideas in that regard.
Well, I probably need to look at your plan and what you guys are trying to accomplish better. I don't off the top of my head, so I would like to kind of maybe get, the scope or what you folks are trying to accomplish, and then see how we could, help you folks with that. So we're certainly interested in doing that. So, but just off the top of my head, I don't.
Well, that's our next agenda item, is for Ryan to give us an update on climate action plan, which you're welcome to stick around for, but I do recognize it's 6:30. Kirk, I believe you had a question or a comment for John?
I sent Molly a couple things I got over the internet. They were basically Belgian ads, animated cartoons for riding transit. I wondered what happened to them. They were kind of cute. I mean, we instead of watching Jim Peplow take the bus to DeGuillermo Park, I mean, I thought they were kind of amusing.
Well, the next type of ad that we will be kind of putting out there is again regarding our mobile app that we're doing with Token Transit. And again, it allows people with smartphones to purchase tickets, or other individuals can purchase a ticket. A parent could purchase a ticket for their kids. So it adds that convenience to being able to get on the bus. We're working with a firm right now to do some videos to kind of highlight that product, but also do like an informational how to use it that we will post on our website. And once we get those done, we will be certainly marketing those and circulating them out to all the certainly the cities and the counties, but we will also be posting those through our social media apps, Facebook and so forth, to let people know that this is available. It's already kind of catching on. But hopefully those types of tools will encourage people who don't maybe ride transit to maybe ride it a little more often. It's challenging again in this size community where the typical commute's not that long. But we're trying to do everything we can to make it more attractive, more convenient. As I said, we're going to be probably undertaking a study in the next year to look at our fixed route system and making it more efficient. We probably have too many stops along the way, which slows up the service. We want to make it more quicker, so there's you don't get on a bus north of town and it takes an hour to get to your job site south of town, or vice versa. So those are things we're trying to look at and trying to improve upon to make transit more attractive.
So quick, Mark, did you have another comment? You're muted, Mark. Mark, you're still muted.
No, I don't. I keep forgetting to mute myself and make all kinds of table noise here, so I apologize for that. John, can you just briefly, one of the issues that's come up in the past with the Sustainability Task Force and transit is fare box subsidies. That there has to be a certain amount of fare box that you recover. Can you mention a little bit, because one of the things that the Climate Action Plan is doing is that also looking at funding issues. And so the idea that we could try to find funding to cover the fare box until the ridership covers itself. That's part of the problem, is we have to build this thing so that we can get people to use it.
Right.
So can you explain a little bit of that? And it don't take too much time, but that's one of the issues we're going to have to deal with. And I think that's Mike kind of picked up on that as well, is that we have this overlap here. So thank you.
Actually, under the state regulations, we have to recover 10% of the fare box in rural areas, 20% in urban areas. And actually, when COVID struck, they came out with the CARES Act, which provided us with a good shot of funding. And we were actually able to recoup a lot of the fare box revenue we lost because of the decline in ridership through the CARES Act. And in fact, during, gosh, I want to say, I don't know if it was March to May, we were actually providing free service on our fixed route service. So it hasn't been a problem because we got that additional funding to meet fare box recovery. And historically, we've done okay at recovering the 20% in urban areas, the 10% in rural areas. So right now, it's not a problem. And again, I would say it's just because we got the additional funding through that federal CARES Act program.
What I'm saying, our plan is to expand transit.
Right.
So can you help us? How are we going to do that? And what is the funding going to be required to do that?
So right now, the process for expanding transit services, because we do a service plan every year, and each jurisdiction contributes a portion of funding. If, let's say, the city of Chico wanted to have additional transit service, if it doesn't meet what we call the unmet transit need process, which we go through annually, which looks at what is, people say, this is what we believe is an unmet need. If it's reasonable to meet, which is an analysis to show that it would meet fare box, if it doesn't meet it, we don't have to provide it. But a jurisdiction, Chico, if they want additional service, they can simply pay for that service. So it would depend on where the service operates to and from, but we could come up with the cost of that. So the cities, the county can fund that additional service. That's up to them to do if it doesn't meet the unmet needs threshold.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good. Any other comments or questions for John? Good discussion. Okay, John, with that, we will move on to our next agenda item. But again, you are welcome to stay on if you'd like an update on where we are with the climate action plan. Before we move on to item 3.2, just a reminder for our attendees, if you do have public comments, please make sure to email them to climatepubliccomments@chicoca.gov. Well, thank you, John. Appreciate you being here. Okay, with that, we'll move on to the next item, which is an update from Ryan and Melissa.
Jury,
Yes.
we have one public comment sent in that I'd like to read out before we move on.
Perfect. Thank you, Molly.
This is from a Chelsea Barron, and she said, would PG&E benefit from a ride share subsidy? It's more of a public question.
I'm sorry, can you say that again? There was a bit of a start.
Would PG&E benefit from a ride share subsidy?
Oh, like PG&E employees.
Perhaps.
Probably. Yeah, that would be a good one to reach out to. Thank you.
Okay, we can move on now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Brian, floor is yours.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, so Melissa, if you can share those slides up. I'm going to start off and give you guys a little bit of an update on where we're at. Talk a little bit about the electrification for new building workshop that we had today. Give you kind of the Cliff Notes version of that. And then Alyssa's going to walk you through where we are with our kind of draft measure quantification. So, so far we have been, we can go forward to the next slide, Alyssa. We've been working on the initial measure quantification. So Alyssa and I have been hard at work looking at the list of measures that we had drafted in previous months and kind of just trying to get a good sense of where we are as far as meeting our 2030 and 2045 targets. This is not kind of the be all end all. Obviously, we still have a lot of massaging of measures to do and community feedback to get. But before we moved on to the next step, we wanted to get a ballpark sense of if our level of effort is in the right area or not. So we moved forward with that. And Alyssa's going to give you kind of the rundown of how we look so far. And we're also working on finishing up a quantification technical appendix. So that'll have all of the justifications for our quantification, really lay that out, as well as provide our substantial evidence, which is kind of a CEQA term, but it's your defensibility so that when someone takes a look at your cap and say, well, how do you know that installing these EV chargers is going to get you a reduction. You can say, well, we don't know for sure, but here's the research that shows it's reasonable to assume that doing this work is going to have these sorts of reductions. So that's all been going on. That's been our main focus. And then we also today had our electrification focus group meeting, which I think went really well. We presented the ordinances for or potential ordinances for new building construction, so all electric construction in new buildings, and also EV charging ordinance to expand capacity and infrastructure for EV charging. And we'll get into a little bit of that in some of the next slides. Next steps, and what we're kind of now switching our focus to is getting ready for our late October release of the public outreach sessions. So Rincon and AIM are working on taking all of the kind of the key measures and actions and getting them into a digestible format that we're going to put onto our website. And use Conveo, which is a platform that allows individuals to make comments directly on the documents. So there'll be some cool graphics and videos and links to other pieces of information. And then community members can go on and click through there and add comments or kind of react to that content like we were having an in-person meeting, like they might do with a sticky note or something at a workshop. And then along with that, Molly and AIM are kind of working on identifying and reaching out to some of the low-income and frontline communities within the city to kind of help prep them a little bit on what's going on and encourage them to attend the online workshop so we can try to get a bigger, cast a broader net for feedback on this next round. And once we get a little bit closer, we'll be providing the draft information for you all to take a look at and provide feedback on before it goes live. And then once it does go live, we'll definitely be leaning on you and your networks to kind of get the word out on this, as well as doing more social media posts and updates, and maybe even some like paid boosted ads on Facebook and things like that. And then once we get all the feedback from the community, we'll work on drafting our final measures list, finalizing language. And once we're there, we'll be providing that to you all for kind of a final go-ahead as we start to get into thinking about drafting our document. So that's kind of where we're going over the next couple of months. Any big questions there before I get into some of the electrification cost effectiveness slides? Cool. Yeah, we can go on to the next one. So I figured wanted to give you all a little kind of the gist of the presentation we gave this morning to some of the builders and other stakeholders kind of in the building space this morning. We had a pretty good turnout and some good conversations, but basically what we tried to focus on was how much is an ordinance that requires all new buildings to be built all electric and increased EV charging capacity going to cost, and what does that mean? So the group presentation was recorded and it'll be available for you guys to check out. So thanks for that. But yeah, we went through kind of 3 different types of cost effectiveness, and we have to kind of define those in order to better understand what we mean when we say cost effective. So there's construction costs or upfront costs, and that's how much is it going to cost me to build this office building or single family residence. Then there's utility bills, utility costs or on-bill costs, and that's if I live in this building or rent this building, are my bills going to get increase or decrease compared to a baseline mixed fuel building? And then we have TDV or time dependent valuation. And this is a little bit more complicated methodology. It pulls together all of those costs and savings over the lifetime of the building, but it also takes into account time of day energy impacts, transmission losses, source energy, environmental impacts. So it puts a cost of carbon on. It also looks at, so if you use energy at some types of parts of the day, if you need to turn peaker plants on, or if you cause more infrastructure to be built, it takes into account all of that. It's much more complicated. I won't pretend to know the exact calculations. Sorry for the background noise. Somehow they're still working on my house at 6:45 in the evening. But yeah, so this TDD number is what the CEC uses to determine cost effectiveness. And it looks at kind of a broader picture of cost effectiveness, but mostly what people care about are construction costs, how much is it going to cost to build this building, and what are my bills going to look like. So we go to the next one, Melissa. So essentially what it boils down to is, according to, this is from the local codes, local energy codes program. And this is a collaboration between the utilities, so PG&E, Sempra, Southern California Edison, and then a couple energy consultants all work together to build out this energy code database, I guess, or studies for the state. And it allows cities to adopt more aggressive building codes than Title 24. This is done all the time. Cities, there's probably dozens or more than that of REACH codes that get adopted every code cycle throughout the state. And now we're looking at it for electrification. So what this slide is showing us is that under the construction costs, we're essentially comparing an all-electric building to a mixed fuel building. And this is code compliant, bare minimum, we're just meeting the code. So for every building type, there's a little bit of a range for the single and multifamily, but for every building type, there's an expected cost savings associated with building a new all-electric building. Again, compared to a code compliant mixed fuel building. But we do see on bill increases for those electric buildings. However, this is under the code compliant minimum, which means we have the kind of the least efficient equipment that we're allowed to put in. So we're not allowed to preempt the federal code, which means like we can't require them to do like a nice induction stove or a heat pump, hot water heater. This is all kind of like not induction, forced heating. So running electricity through a coil to heat up the water. So under this kind of basic scenario, cheaper to build the building, more expensive to live in it, but the time-dependent valuation, life cycle costing is positive. So effectively, you could implement all-electric buildings for all of these building types in Chico, and the CEC would approve it based on cost effectiveness. What's really interesting, if we go to the next slide, if you take some of the savings that you get from constructing that building all electric and you put it into your solar panel size, so you do a slightly bigger solar panel array, you still save money on the building side, but only like $1,500, $1,700, but you get a lifetime on bill cost savings and what's considered an infinite time-dependent value cost ratio, which means you're saving in the construction and you're saving on your bills over time. So really good news. Same for the hotel and retail. With the office, it's marginal. Using an energy efficiency, like building out the insulation, windows, things like that, a little bit better. Increases your construction costs a little bit compared to baseline, but you do see these significant long-term savings. And again, if you use those federally preempted appliances, it's possible that you could still have a savings on your construction costs because it's generally lower cost than these efficiency upgrades, like to Windows are super expensive. So pretty good news overall, cost effective across the board, and most of the building types are kind of a win-win scenario. So I'll pause there and see if you guys have any questions on that. But yeah, we will be able to also make the full presentation available to you guys if you want to watch it or interested in digging into this a little bit deeper.
Kirk?
So if we go back to the previous slide, I just can't read the slides.
Yeah, let's go back.
So like under single family construction costs it's reduced 30,000 or it could cost up to 3,700 more.
Yeah, and that's per single family building. And the general driver there is how much you're saving by not installing natural gas. So one of the good conversations we had today was one of the attendees was working on like a big greenfield development with like 150 homes in Butte County somewhere. I don't think in Chico, but elsewhere. And he was like, "Hey, we did this analysis, and it's more expensive to go all electric." And the reason that is because generally it's pretty cheap to do trenching and natural gas installation in a greenfield because you don't have to go around buildings or deal with other equipment like roads and things like that are like in the way. And those costs for new natural gas infrastructure are being subsidized by the natural gas utility. They don't pay for that infrastructure. All of the ratepayers do. So there's some nuance there, and it is potential in some situations it might be more expensive, but on average and in a majority of cases, it's going to be a savings.
Up to $30,000, $30,788.
Yeah, what's crazy is the hotel savings. And I guess most hotels are just built all electric for the most part anyway, except for sometimes they'll do like natural gas in their kitchens, but like all the units don't use gas most of the time.
Yeah, okay. I just didn't know how to read the table. All right. Thank you.
Mark, I saw a chat pop up. Do you have a question?
There we go. Yeah, I was just curious if you did any quantification about the co-benefits of improvements of indoor air quality. I mean, that's been a big push from the decarb folks and others. So I was curious if that got put in there as well. Thanks.
Yeah, we really figured our audience would be mostly focused on their bottom line. So we focused on the cost effectiveness first, but we did have some slides in there, and we talked about I think like 90% of the night NO2 released in California is from commercial and residential buildings, and oftentimes indoor air quality can exceed outdoor air quality standards. And Rocky Mountain Institute just released, I don't think they did the study, but there's just a peer-reviewed study NO2 emissions and NO2 emissions and COVID mortality, which I thought was interesting. Definitely not causation in any way, but kind of linking those air quality impacts to health impacts. So we covered that a little bit as well.
Thank you.
If I'm the one with no internet or.
Yeah, you are freezing a little bit, Ryan.
Yep.
Alyssa, oh, you might have her back.
I had one quick question, Sherry, when we get Ryan back.
Sure. It's hard to see everybody in a row with the slides share. Sorry about that. Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Alyssa, do you want to take over from Ryan? Mike, what was your question?
Well, really, kind of. I mean, it was somewhat rhetorical, but I mean, when Ryan went through the numbers, it's like, hey, all the electrification numbers look really good. So, like, what's the counter argument? Like, so why not? If all the numbers pencil out, what's the case against it, and why aren't we getting better adoption?
There was, I don't know if Alyssa, I think you've got a lot of background noise there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Molly and Brendan were also there, but you know, I heard that the numbers that were presented, those cost numbers, are not necessarily what some developers are seeing, and that they're saying that it's not penciling out as rosy as maybe is presented in those slides. And so I think there's some deeper conversations that need to be had around the sources of this information, especially when it comes to talking about the cost of these things. There was also a conversation about technology and mandates, and so kind of waiting to see what the PUC and the California Energy Commission are going to do around this. California state mandates. How is this going to play out in both the technology and the incentive space? And so the comments this morning were that the person said that there was some movement within the PUC and the CEC around electrification and decarbonization. And so the timing of how this gets rolled out and making sure that we're matching up with what the state is doing from a regulatory perspective, which will then also drive the incentives in technology. I don't know if Molly or Brendan, you had anything to add to that from the conversation this morning.
I guess the other couple of things we heard talks some macro issues that weren't just directly related to electrification, but it was about the bigger system and grid capability and concerns about that. There was talk about consumer preference, of course, suggestions about what are we doing if we're just relying on one fuel type. And there were some nice answers that Ryan presented on those issues. And another one was, hey, the state's going to make this a requirement soon enough. You know, why are we getting ahead of them? So just some things like that or some other topics that came up.
There's also several entities within the city of Chico that follow other permitting regulations, Chico State being one of them, and Chico Unified School District. And so the thought there was, you know, there's a lot of people that wouldn't necessarily be impacted by an ordinance.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that additional background. And I was just curious because I mean, there is an opportunity when there are subdivisions and new projects and new developments coming in. That's the best time to be able to do these kinds of things as opposed to retrofitting.
Yeah, there was a conversation this morning about developments in an urban setting where infrastructure exists versus like a greenfield development.
Right.
Where the infrastructure costs for natural gas are cheaper than electrical infrastructure. And so depends on the site and where it's being developed. A lot of these numbers that we're seeing from the cities that have banned natural gas in residential development are urban settings like Sacramento. And so there was just a conversation about that. No answers, obviously, but something to consider. It doesn't look like we've got Ryan back, or maybe he's back without video.
I'm like sort of here. I don't know why I'm having such really bad internet right now, but I'm kind of following along.
Yeah, it happens. The world we live in right now.
Yeah.
Are you with us, Ryan? Are you out there?
I'm here. I told everyone in my house to stop streaming movies and get off the internet, so hopefully it helps.
Good. Do you want to pick back up again?
Yeah, I was gonna actually just over.
Sounds like he's going to turn it over to Alexa.
So
In
is
case
the
you have any
background
questions,
noise?
Teresa, it sounds like you filled in some of the other.
Ryan, you're breaking up.
Sorry, can you guys hear me?
You're breaking up pretty bad, Ryan.
for me to continue the
I'm
slides.
just gonna pass it over to Alyssa.
Okay.
Yeah.
I am unfortunately also a little bit struggling with this WebEx application, so I couldn't get myself unmuted before. But is the background noise better now? Is it less loud when I unmute myself?
Yes.
Okay, great. I think it was my computer working overtime, so hopefully once I reshare the PowerPoint, hopefully it will be okay. So I'll do this again. And then is this in full screen at this point for you guys?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to pivot now and talk about the measure quantification that we've been working on for the past couple of weeks. We sort of looked at the entire list of measures and looked at sort of the outcomes of those measures and tried to quantify what we thought the emission reductions would be. And we based it on data from the city and also some other technical studies relating to greenhouse gas emissions in general and other case studies in other cities. And like Ryan mentioned, we have all of that information in the technical appendix that we're putting together. So if you have any questions during the presentation, I'm happy to answer them, but also there will be extensive detail in that technical appendix that you'll be able to review as well. So I'll just start off by going over the measures that we pulled out for quantification, and just a note also that there's a lot of actions going into all of the strategies that we've come up with for all the different sectors, and they're all really important to making the measures a reality. But we've chosen to focus and sort of pull out the ones that are directly quantifiable because they're implementable and can be tied to expected greenhouse gas reductions, so that we're pulling out any guesswork and we're really solid on what reductions we think we're going to actually see. So even though you don't see all of the measures here that we have from the CAP so far and everything that we've put together, those are all supporting. These are just the ones that we've chosen to quantify. So just really quickly, I'll go through what we have, and this is not the exact wording of what the measures are going to be, but they kind of get at the idea so that you know what we're talking about. So the first one for energy is to require all electric new residential and commercial construction. And then we have implementation years for that ordinance of 2022 for new residential and then 2025 for new commercial. These are years that we think are pretty reasonable for the implementation, and we can mess with that if we want, and it will kind of affect the different reductions that we get, but we think that this is a good place to start. The next one is electrifying existing residential buildings, and that's kind of quantitatively supported by two measures, which are to require the HVAC and water heaters to be electric by 2025. So that's at time of replacement. We're going to require those to be electric. And then also implementing this REACH code, which will help sort of invigorate that process so that at time of sale, those retrofits are happening, so that can kind of help speed up the process as well. And then we also have a measure in there to electrify municipal buildings by 2045. So that's going to lead to some quantifiable reductions. And then the last is to decrease the carbon intensity of the electricity used in Chico through the Butte County CCA. And that leads to some pretty substantial greenhouse gas reductions as well. And then on the transportation side, there were two measures that we pulled out for quantification. One was to implement the bicycle master plan. In the bicycle master plan, the analysis that was done sort of predicts that implementing the plan in full will result in a 12% mode share by 2030. So that's the number that we went with to calculate our reductions for that. And then the other measure is to increase EV adoption to 23% by 2030 and greater than 50%, hopefully 100% by 2045. And we're going to achieve that by installing 980 new public chargers by 2030. And we calculated that number based on some case studies that indicate that the level of service needed to accommodate the number of electric vehicles that we're expecting in Chico, this 23% by 2030, we need to have about one electric charger per every 20 electric vehicles in order for the city to do its part in supporting that transition. So even though Chico can't mandate that every resident buy electric vehicles, they can provide the infrastructure that's going to be needed, and they can adjust their ordinances, and they can provide that infrastructure. And then under waste, the biggest one is reaching the requirements of SB 1383, and that reduces organic waste disposal 75% and increases edible food recovery 20% by 2025. And then for sequestration, we have implementation of the urban forest revitalization program, and we have a goal to plant 700 trees by 2022, and then a new goal to plant 4,500 trees by 2030. Does anyone have any questions at this point about which measures we chose? I can get into the actual quantification that we did, but I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
My only question at this point, oh, sorry, go ahead. Okay, my question at this point is, when will we start to see some of the, I appreciate these reports, but will there be documents or some of these quantifications sent to us in between meetings?
So we're still in the process of finalizing the draft of our technical appendix for these measures. So I think once we do, we're going to send that to the city. That's going to happen probably in the next week or so. And then I think once the city reviews, we can send that to you. But we just wanted to get sort of our initial results out to you now. But you definitely will see
Okay.
the full analysis for sure.
Good, thank you.
Alyssa, I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Dave.
On the existing residential buildings, the city of Chico now has flow shower heads, those kind of things. Is this going to be required as somebody sells their house? Is that going to be on the seller, the buyer, before the investment? And the other thing was on the waste. We've seen that the garbage company, the franchise agreement, is not going to cost an increase in their franchise because we are changing the franchise agreement to add another, another job for them and what they bid on. That's it.
Is my background noise bad again as always? Okay, I apologize for that. I think it's my computer.
Yeah, definitely good.
Okay, sorry about that. Is it like very bad? I could try turning off my video. That could help.
It's not bad when you speak. It's just when you're not speaking. So just mute yourself when you're not speaking.
Okay, it's hard for me to share the screen and mute myself. Like I don't have an option to mute myself while I'm sharing the screen.
Okay,
So
I'll just be
rely on you to do it. Yeah.
Totally.
Okay, great. Okay, so I had a little trouble hearing, but I think that you were asking about the REACH code, the RICO, like when it's implemented, at what point will the retrofits happen? It would happen at time of sale. I don't recall the exact details of the REACH code, so I don't know, Ryan, if you want to jump in and give more detail on that. But I think that we have the sort of full description of the measure in our list of measures, and we can go back and look at that, but I'm not recalling off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think, can you guys hear me? I think I'm mostly back now.
Yes.
Awesome. All right. So yeah, With the HVAC and hot water heaters, those we're right now expecting this would be something we'd implement later, so around 2025 or so, and it would be at time of replacement of that equipment. Whereas the RICO is already in place, and that's at time of sale, and it wouldn't be a requirement for electrification, but rather provide the option of electrification to satisfy the requirements of the RICO.
And the waste.
And what was the question around waste?
The waste is because the city of Chico has a franchise agreement now based on certain jobs that they're going to provide, and they paid X amount of dollars over so many years. By adding this onto the garbage company and picking that up, because franchise agreement's it's going to have to be negotiated, and that's going to require a increase to the public to reduce these to get to these numbers on SB 1383.
Yeah, I believe that we talked through that a little bit, and there is a clause in your franchise agreement that they need to comply with state regulations, and that there will have to probably be some changes to that agreement. But again, this is just the state requirement. We're not going above that at all. We're just kind of formalizing it in the climate action plan. So it's something that they need to do to be compliant with state legislation either way.
I guess my point is there's going to be a cost. I mean, we're going to have a savings, greenhouse gas emissions, and that cost is going to be passed along to the public or commercial. Most of the food recovery is going to come from commercial restaurants and places that serve a lot of food, not necessarily from a homeowner in residential. So I was just concerned about where the cost is going to come from, or where it's going to get passed down to, because the garbage company is not going to do it for free.
Yeah, there definitely could be a increase in cost. I'm not sure that the cost for green waste is higher than for regular garbage, so you might be able to downsize the rate of pickup or the number of cans you have for regular garbage and shift that over to having one for green waste. That's worked at some larger facilities that we work at. I think it would just kind of be dependent on how that contract agreement turns out. But kind of like I said, there's not really a way. This is a state legislation, and it's something that you're going to have to do kind of either way. So it's not, there may be a cost and there may not. I'm not positive either way, but it's kind of being driven at the state level rather than through our climate action plan. But yeah, you're right. If there is a cost increase, it would get passed on to consumers or businesses.
I have a question actually for Brendan. Make him work a little bit here today. Brendan, when will, if they pass a code for all electric residential in 2022, what houses does that apply to? I know we keep hearing that in the housing discussions, we have all of these permitted, thousands of permitted houses. What does and does this not apply to? Thanks.
So it's not when you receive your entitlement, it's when you bring in your plans to the building department and receive your building permits. So it would depend on the timing of a project moving forward with their building permits. And to be honest, we do have times like when there's going to be a change in a building code, a significant one, we do get mad rushes where people bring their building plans in for apartments or homes. There are some limitations, but they want to get them in under the last building code cycle to reduce some of their costs. So it would all based on when a code or an ordinance got adopted, and then when it went into effect, and then in place when people submitted and received submitted their building plans.
If I could ask just one more question from those folks who were there. Do you think that folks were so worried about this that they would rush the stage for or rush the counter for a code like this? Or was this one, that's not as big a deal and I'm not going to mess up the rest of my plans just to get my pens in early?
I guess it would depend on some of the information that Ryan was sharing earlier about cost benefit. Also, there are some limitations. It's a significant investment to submit your plans kind of.
Sure.
There's a lot of effort that goes into that. So, and also, we also suggest, I think there's some rules, I need to confirm this, but you can't submit something that you're not going to build within a certain time frame, and it's not in perpetuity. So you might lose the fact that you got it in under the gun, but if you don't build within, I'm going to want to be careful here, 6 months, a year, that you lose that building permit and have to resubmit under the new building code. I don't have my exact time frame on there, but I know it's within a year.
That everything you just said was very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, Ryan and Alyssa, do you have more to this topic, or how are we doing?
Yes, I
Okay.
take you through the actual reductions that we've calculated for the measurements that we just went through. Okay, so we're going to start with the energy. So you can see the measure reductions, or the greenhouse gas reductions that we're expecting from each measure in 2025, 2030, and 2045. And these are in metric tons of CO2 equivalent. And I've sort of organized these for you so you can see which ones will have the biggest impact. You can see that implementing the CCA is going to have the biggest impact. And that's because we're reducing basically all emissions from electricity in the city of Chico to zero or almost zero. And the way that we calculated this was actually, we did take into account that there would be some level of opt-out among community members. So the feasibility study that was published for implementing the Butte County CCA was, I think they estimated there would be about a 5% residential opt-out and a 15% commercial opt-out. So we accounted for that when we calculated these reductions. So this is where a major source of the reductions are coming from when you look at all the measures as a whole. The second, probably most impactful, is definitely electrifying existing residential buildings. This is a really difficult thing to do, but if we can, or if Chico can accomplish this on the timeline that we're expecting based on replacements at time of sale or at time of replacement, then we'll see some really good reductions there. The way that we calculated this was by looking at the average lifespan of HVAC and water heater systems, and assuming that at time of replacement they would be replaced with all electric retrofits, and that those retrofits would also be about 3 times more efficient than their natural gas counterparts. So this is definitely a reduction that happens over time. You can see it's not very big in 2025, but by 2045, when the HVAC and water heaters have mostly been replaced in most homes, that you get a really big reduction. I do want to note that the HVAC and water heater replacements account for about 70% of energy usage in the home. So you don't get total reduction from existing buildings for this, but you do get pretty close. And then the next one going down the line is requiring all electric new residential and commercial construction. So we get some reductions from that as well. The way that we calculated this was actually by using housing forecasts from BCAG to make assumptions about how much new residential construction would be happening through 2045, and then calculating what natural gas usage would be reduced by implementing this measure. And then the last one is electrifying municipal buildings by 2045. We have an estimate from the city about how much natural gas usage the city uses annually. So we used those numbers to calculate these reductions. For transportation, easily the most impactful measure would be to achieve EV adoption in 2030 and 2045. So again, this was calculated sort of based on what seemed like a reasonable percentage for Chico to achieve in terms of what level of infrastructure they could provide by 2030 and 2045. So we have some pretty major reductions from that in 2045 as well as 2030. And then the next one is the bicycle plan, and that assumes that Chico is able to achieve 12% mode share by 2030, which is assumed in the bicycle master plan after full implementation. So this gives us maybe some limited reductions, but important nevertheless.
I'll just, while we're here, Alyssa, if we can go back to that transportation one.
Yeah.
Sorry to butt in, but one conspicuous thing missing here is transit. And after we dug through the transit measures that we had, we didn't feel like there was any that were kind of gonna guarantee a VMT reduction. So we did not, we have them, the measures will still be there, but we feel like at this point they need to be supportive until we can get something that's a little more concrete, just from a defensibility point of view. And then hearing kind of some more today about like what PCAG's up to, and we're kind of in this weird transition state with COVID and just not sure how things are going to pan out. We think that that's kind of still a good way to go, unless we make some pretty major changes to the transit measures that are included currently. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. All right, moving on. We have our single quantifiable waste measure and then our quantifiable sequestration measure. The implementation of SB 1383 leads to significant reduction in 2030 and 2045. And then also the urban forest revitalization plan, we were able to look at the sequestration potential of the trees that are being proposed in that plan. And based on the targeted number of trees, we're able to calculate the reductions from that. So I will sort of show you where we end up after all of this. Once you account for all of these measures, and then we don't quantify the other measures that are included. They're going to be included in the CAP, but as part of the technical appendix that we're providing, we do include a lot of case studies and a lot of substantial evidence to defend the measures that are maybe not quantifiable, but will ultimately help lead to more GHG reductions. So we like to do it this way because this is a more conservative approach. We assume that we'll get X number of reductions from these measures that are more concrete, have really clear goals and are able to quantify really concretely what's going on. But then we have all of these other supportive measures and actions that will ultimately probably result in even greater greenhouse gas reductions. So this is our preferred approach, is to look at it more conservatively and not assume that we're going to get X number of emission reductions from doing outreach or something like that. So if we're just looking at the quantified measures that we have so far, we actually are looking really good in 2030. So this graph is showing your past emissions, and then we have our business as usual. I think we've showed you guys this graph before. We're business as usual if the state doesn't have any intervention, and then with state intervention, what we expect your emissions to be is this blue line. I don't know if you can see where my cursor is moving, I just realized. But the gray line is your business as usual. The blue line is the adjusted for state intervention. And then this darker blue line down here is actually your emissions after we account for reductions. And then we've also put in your targets for 2030 and 2045, sort of the minimum targets that you would want to meet. And with the measures that we've quantified, we're actually coming in below our 2030 target right here. And then our 2045 target, we're obviously not meeting. That's okay. The way that the caps are being set up right now in general across the state is we just want to show that we're making progress towards the 2045 goal. And we're going to rely on technology in the future and further updates to the cap to ultimately meet the 2045 goal. But I did want to show you guys that currently with the quantifications we have, we are meeting this 2030 goal, and that's, I think, with a pretty conservative lens through it. So I think that's really good news. This is also especially interesting because we are not quantifying anything from the transit measures, like Ryan mentioned. So I think that this is looking like it's in really good shape. And I'm happy to answer any more questions at this point, or Ryan as well.
Thanks, Alyssa. Anybody have any questions, comments for Alyssa and team? It's like Mark, you're queuing up.
Yeah, so I'm looking at this and I'm looking at the measures that you proposed, and so I see where we're the blue and we're not going to, I get the sense we're not going to make 2045, but if we don't do the the electrification codes, we basically are the adjusted blue line, right? Because that was the main features of all of this. I just want to point out, people are saying, well, if we don't do this and all of those measures, we're not the dark blue line, we're the light blue line. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. If we don't implement anything from the cap, basically, if we have no cap and we move forward, then we're this light blue line here. So we're not, so Chico doesn't meet the goal under those. It doesn't meet the target under that assumption.
But in looking at your reduction measures, it's really electrification that is accounting for almost all of them. I don't see them as they broke down between those measures. I can't judge these parts, but it sure seems that way.
I think the CCA was the biggest one.
So the biggest single measure is definitely the implementation of the CCA. That's here. So you're getting 55,000 metric ton reduction in 2025 and even bigger in 2030. And then obviously you have no reduction for that in 2045 because by then utilities are state mandated to 100% carbon-free electricity. So it would be, you would basically be double counting if you count any reductions there from implementing the CCA. And then, obviously the other two, electrification of existing buildings and also electrification of new buildings is also a major part of that. I think also electrification, EV adoption is another big part. So it definitely very much hinges on electrification.
And then now you mentioned the double counting. Can you go to the last slide? Do you figure that and all of a sudden at 2045, everything where electrical goes, doesn't seem like there's a big change. Anyway, never mind. That's beyond the scope of this discussion tonight at 7:27. Thank you.
A majority of the downward trend on that light blue line is coming from implementation of SB 100, which is 100% renewable or 100% carbon free by 2045. That's why that line slopes down like that.
Okay. The orangey one, or whatever color that is.
No, so the orange is your target. It's where we want to be.
Okay.
It's the difference. A lot of the difference between the gray dotted line, which is your business as usual, and the light blue dotted line is SB 100
okay.
Driving that down.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Trying to look at, anybody else have comments, questions for Ryan and Lisa?
In your earlier chart, you showed that if, like we get a 48,000 reduction by 2045 in some of the electrification measures, but that's not picked up in this, or is that picked up in this bar graph? So even if we do everything by 2045, we're still going to be in a jam.
So the calculations that we did, like I mentioned, assume a 50% adoption of EVs by 2045. So if you actually drive that to 100, you get much closer to this 2045 goal. Another reason that it's this dark blue line is not getting to zero is because the way that the existing building electrification is set up is to only replace HVAC and water heaters at time of replacement. And those account for 70%, not 100% of natural gas usage in homes. So the other, what would that be? The other 30% would be from stoves and other uses like laundry, things like that.
Okay.
I think, Kirk, the idea is that we're really trying to start building out the systems that will allow you to get to carbon neutrality, right? So we'll start building out the systems to have electric vehicles, and we'll start building out the systems to have electric buildings. But there's most likely going to have to be some technological updates or just more support from the state in order for you to get to that long-term target of zero, because it's going to be a lot of effort to get there. But we can get you. We don't really want to start making projections out 25 years from now. We kind of want to think in this 5-10 year time frame what we can do to start prepping for that long-term goal.
There was a warning implicit in your, I don't know, some of the earlier publications that we had to read that suggested that if we just have to do this mad scramble at the end, that would just be onerous. I can't remember. It was how you calculate whether it was per capita or citywide. I think that was the difference you pointed out. Anyway, I'm just recalling something that you guys turned out maybe the second meeting we had.
Yeah, I think we're talking about the actual targets we set. So this target that we have set up right now is the kind of linear to carbon neutral efficiency standard. So it looks kinked, but it's based on just kind of population numbers. But these are more aggressive than the kind of state minimum targets, and that's really to help kind of preload some of these reductions. So if you look at draw a straight line between where we are currently and 2045, the first part of our dark blue line is kind of on that slope. And then we kind of mellow out the reduction slope because most of our measures go to 2030, not 2045. So I think we are doing a pretty good job of getting you on the trajectory so that in your future caps, you'll be able to add more measures and continue that reduction trajectory down to zero in 2045.
Okay.
That makes sense.
I have a question, and this may be another question for Brendan and Molly. What exactly was the city's requirement to there's a 2030 requirement and a 2050 requirement? I'm curious if if this plan will actually meet the goals set out by the state and the city.
So it's an interesting term, requirement. There's goals. They're seeking to be consistent with those goals. And I think what the analysis Ryan's trying to show is that with the application and the implementation of the climate action plan, they would be achieved.
I think he's saying that if the plan is the dark blue ones, it doesn't seem like we get to 80% or whatever it is that we're supposed to get that the state goal was. Because the governor came out with a separate one rather than the one that's, his was, neutrality by 2045 and everyone jumped yay. But that's not actually, I don't believe, what the city said. I'm just curious,
I don't have the exact answer. I think, again, Ryan was emphasizing, and I agree, it's on such a long time continuum, it's going to be difficult to quantify to some exact sense that'll be achieved with so many other issues that will have to kind of play out at the state level, et cetera. So I don't have an exact answer. Sorry.
I think, Mark, the difference is what we're trying to do is we've set a target of carbon neutrality by 2045. So there's two executive orders. There's S305, which was like 2005-ish. That was Schwarzenegger, and it was 40% or return to 1990 by 2020 and 80% by 2050, below 1990 levels. And then the new executive order is B5518, which established carbon neutrality by 2045. And the city has, so far, we've kind of gone with establishing carbon neutrality by 2045 as our long-term goal that we're setting with the city, and at least a 40% reduction below 1990 levels by 2030. So the 2030 target is codified by SB 32. So in this plan, we need to show quantifiable steps and quantifiable actions to get to 2030. But we only need to show substantial progress towards our 2045 goal because it's just so far away. I could, we could make up a bunch of things and say, oh, we're going to have 100% renewable buildings or 100% electric buildings and 100% electric vehicles and all renewable electricity and have no waste and our emissions will be zero. But we have no way to say like how to get there right now, right? There's no defensible measures we could put in place. So we focus on the trajectory towards those goals and staying along that, which we're kind of exceeding that with our current suite. But really it's 2030 we're focusing on, and then subsequent caps will have new measures given new legislation and new technologies to get us the rest of the way to our goal that is carbon neutrality in 2045.
Okay, I'll just respectfully slightly disagree, but okay, I get it. I mean, it's pretty easy that the only way we're getting to our goal is to eliminate the use of fossil fuels. And that's a big, huge part of the electrification measure. So there's no way we can get to anything in 2045 if we don't do that. I guess that's, we don't really have a clear, this is what we got to get to the end that I was hoping for. But I understand why you're doing it, and Godspeed.
Yeah, no, I think we're on the same page, right? Like our measures are working on eliminating fossil fuels, and that's how we're going to get to carbon neutrality. And I think we know what carbon neutrality looks like. We just don't have all of the steps that we can take right now to get there in a relatively cost-effective manner. Like it's going to be an iterative process, and like we have the time scale set up, and we have the where we're going set up, and we have the foundation for getting there being developed in this cap, but we're going to have to keep working at it over time to keep refining our approach based on like how the state reacts to this and puts funding and support into these long-term measures.
I think all of us are probably going to need some time to digest this data and this information that you put forward, and it's tough to make comments without having time to really process it. It looked like, Mike, where did you go? It looked like you had some comments.
Yeah, I just had one quick question for Ryan and Alyssa, and it's kind of the counterpoint to the question I had for John Clark with BCAG about the sort of, there's a lot of overlap between what BCAG is doing and what we're working on. Of course, they have a different charter and they're looking at the whole county, not just at the city of Chico, but BCAG and John in particular, I mean, they've been looking at some of parallel but related issues. He's been doing it for 25 years, looking at transportation and growth and housing and all these issues in the county at large. And it seems like there is some benefit there to some overlap in the context of how can he help us and how can we help him. His response was, well, if I knew more about what you guys were doing and what you were working on, I might have a better answer. And he stuck in for a little while. I'm just wondering how you guys see that. Is there more that you could sort of send over to him or do a little bit coordination? And I'm not trying to make scope creep for you guys for what your focus is, but it seems like there could be some benefit in some focused follow-up with BCAG.
Yeah, I was really, really happy that you posed that question because I wanted to, but didn't think that was really what I was supposed to be doing. So I think that there is a lot more coordination we could do. And if there's interest from the group and from the city, kind of setting up a meeting to talk through with them as a key stakeholder to see if we can expand on some of those transit measures or at least see what their thoughts and plans are. I think would be a really good use of our time. I think transit is going to be difficult in the short term, but having those conversations seems like a good way to go either way.
Yep. Okay.
Agreed.
Thanks.
Mike, anything else?
No, that was it. Thank you.
Mark or anybody else? Right. Okay. Yeah.
We did get 2 public comments,
Good.
questions. Why is sequestering going to be mainly planting trees? Why not focus on restoring wetlands? Is it easier to plant trees? And would a microgrid be the only way that Chico is able to electrify and meet their goals, or is Chico only relying on PG&E to supply electricity? These were both from the same person, Chelsea. And if we don't want to get too into it today, I can also follow up with her.
Yeah, I'll just add a quick note on the first one. We are looking at not just trees, but measuring the carbon content of our soils and different soil types. And so, as discussed at the last commission meeting, that will be a potential ad hoc work group that between this commission and the Bidwell Parks and Playgrounds Commission to start to measure the amount of carbon that can be sequestered in different soil types. And that work has begun on campus. So we're looking to expand that beyond the campus boundaries into the city of Chico. So that is still TBD. That's not necessarily measured or quantified yet to the point that we could include it in the climate action plan. And then the second one was about electrification and PG&E.
Yes, would a microgrid be the only way Chico is able to electrify and meet its goals, or is Chico only relying on PG&E?
I see. The city of Chico is moving, and I'll just make this quick and then we can follow up in more detail afterwards offline if you'd like. But there was discussion earlier about the CCA, which is the Community Choice Aggregation. And that forms a joint power authority within Butte County, potentially larger, that the city of Chico is looking to participate in. Which takes basically the ability to contract where power comes from, so that we can source more renewable power or from different locales. We would still be reliant upon the PG&E infrastructure, so there won't be a decoupling from PG&E infrastructure. We'll still rely on that for transmission and delivery of the power, but we can be a bit more localized in where we're sourcing that power from and making sure that we have renewable sources of energy. So that was the CCA line, which showed up as I think the number one item in the list that was ahead. So if you have more questions on that, feel free to reach out and we can have a further conversation about that. Any other questions from commissioners for Alyssa and Ryan?
I have one.
Okay, go ahead, Dave.
I am concerned about when you're putting this together, why we haven't heard anything about the participation of Chico Unified School District, Chico State University, and CARD. CARD does most of the parks where we plant trees and to do things. It's a separate organization, I understand, but between Chico State and the Chico Unified School District, there's a lot of these items that kind of go hand in hand with the city of Chico because they're part of the city of Chico. I'm wondering why there really hasn't been any interaction between those organizations and putting together the climate action.
Well, first of all, that's my job for campus is to put together the climate action plan for Chico State. So I think I serve as kind of a direct link between Chico State and the city of Chico. Mark is also faculty at the Chico State campus and is an incredible liaison between Chico State and the city of Chico's efforts, connecting faculty work and experience with student experience. There is great synergy already happening there, so I'm not sure why you feel that that's lacking. Chico Unified is a great question, and we have connected with Chico Unified, I believe, on some of these specific measures, but I'm not sure what capacity you're hoping that they would serve. I guess I'm not.
Well, I guess my point is they, if you've ever driven to near an elementary school at 8 o'clock in the morning or 2:30 in the afternoon, all of the cars that are going to pick up children or the bus service that they have, and hard with the way people have, because slowly but surely the city of Chico is giving cards more and more of the parks. I'm just wondering why they're, and I didn't mean that about Chico State, because I know you guys are doing everything you can. So I was probably overstepping my bounds on that. But the school district and CARD are two integral parts of our city when it comes to parks and transportation and the things that are going on at the school, especially with education and stuff with the young kids. I just didn't see any of the information in this plan. Maybe it isn't supposed to be in there.
Well, Dave, I mean, they have been, we've directly communicated with them on the public outreach piece of this climate action plan. So directly soliciting their feedback and input in these measures that were put together. And that was done through the community outreach that we did late June, early July-ish, I think the timeframe was. They're clearly on the list for reaching out to, for some of these very specific measures. I believe they were invited to the electrification workshop. So they have been consulted and engaged as part of this process. And, as you saw, if you went through that list of the entire list of measures, they showed up very prominently in the entirety of the measures that have been brought forward so far.
Okay. I just missed it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would all like more participation, but there's only so much we can do by sending direct communication and soliciting feedback if they're unwilling to provide that feedback. So they've been on every list that we've ever had for community outreach.
Sheree, I think too, now that we are getting towards having a more complete final draft list of measures, there might be an opportunity to kind of reach back out to some of these key stakeholders, whether it's ECAG or some of the schools or others, to give them another nudge and see if there's some opportunity for them to expand or make some of these measures more specific, which could be cool. So we can look into that as well.
Right. Yeah. And so the public comment, Dave, that'll go live in October. It's in a couple weeks. I can't remember which date that goes live, but once that website is up, which we talked about in our previous meeting, we'll have this website that people can contribute their input on these measures. That they will get bombarded with solicitation to provide feedback into this for sure. Alyssa, can you stop sharing your screen? I'm having a hard time keeping track of everybody. Perfect. So there we go. Okay. Now I can see everybody. Mark, something else?
I would just point out to Ryan that the school district's about to build another high school within the next couple of years, and it'd be great if it was all electric.
My experience working with the school board, dealing with extending bike routes and not interrupting the one that comes from the north of the campus down to the campus was very frustrating. It's like they think they're an autonomous agency and they basically have nothing to do with the community. I was frustrated. I spoke to everybody about this. I even went to school board meetings.
Well, we'll keep doing it. we'll keep going with the outreach. I want to keep moving us along. Anything else for Ryan or Alyssa on what they've presented today? I recognize that this is a lot of information that they've brought to us, and they think all of us need time to process it. But anything immediately for them? Hearing none, we'll move on to item number 4, business from the floor and public comment. We've had a few public comments already. Anything else, Molly?
No further comment.
Okay, good. Item number 5, reports and communications. A couple of those.
None from staff.
Okay. I think Mark had a report communication.
Did you say Mike or Mark? I don't, it is my, okay.
Mark, but it looks like Mike has one as well. So Mark, why don't you go first?
My report communication is that I reached out to the Planning Commission, and John Hallett and Bryce Goldstein are both interested in serving on an ad hoc committee with myself and Kirk. And so we're gonna reach out, going slowly to not panic Brendan. And the next thing will be to set a meeting, and I'm going to try and reach out to Brendan to also to join us at that, to tell us all the stuff we can't talk about, so that we can kind of move forward and figure out the things that we can. So that's the next step.
Wonderful. Great. Thanks, Mark.
Great.
Mike?
I just had one. Yeah, one of my questions was that I saw that discussion about ad hoc in the minutes from last time. So Mark just answered that question. And the other was, I know there was some reference to the meeting that occurred this morning, which I think was with some of the sort of building industry groups. So we kind of talked a little bit about that, but was there anything else that came out of that meeting that we should share with the group for people that weren't able to attend?
I'll share that recording with you all so you can see that for those of you who aren't able to attend.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
I will say that there were some really great conversations this morning that, I think we need to have further conversations. I think it went really well. There's a lot of openness to this idea of electrification. There were also some very valid concerns that were raised. So I think overall it was encouraging.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. Yeah, I was curious. So thanks. That's it.
Any other reports and communications? Okay, if no more reports and communications, we will go ahead and adjourn for the night, 7:51. Those of you joining us from the public, thank you for being here. We appreciate your participation and look forward to seeing you at the next meeting on November 12th. Yes, we're already in October. Okay, I'll see everybody on November 12th. Thank you all for being here.
Sheree, you did a great job tonight. Zooming is all.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Good evening.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
I'm walking down the
I
street.
know.
Bye, guys. Thank you.